209th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We're super excited to be here. We have James Wickett joining us today. Where we're going to get into his background and all things security here shortly. Before we do that, we do have a couple of announcements. First off, as we've mentioned in the past, there are still seats available for our training at DEF CON, Practical Secure Code Review. Runs the 2 days after DEF CON, and we would love to see you there. This is the first time we're doing a public course in a while, right? I think since Kernel Con, so March or so. But would love to have anyone that listens to the podcast there and subscribe to talk through how we do manual secure code reviews. Otherwise, Ken's looking sharp with the new glasses, and I think we can. Well, actually, right? Like we are going to do sponsorships, right? I do have sponsor copy, so I can't forget that at this point, right? Because these are guys that make it possible. Sponsored, yeah. Okay, so Absolute AppSec. This episode is sponsored by Redpoint Security. And from Redpoint, have you been looking to bolster your application security or improve your organization security program? Well, then you should check out our sponsor, Redpoint Security. Redpoint specializes in code security for coders, bolstered by years of experience testing in web and mobile applications. It also offers developer training to help ground your software teams in better security practices to improve CI/CD results, as well as the overall maturity of your security program. So please check out redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company and developer teams on a path to better security. Thanks to Redpoint for sponsoring this episode. All right, Ken, with that, I think we should introduce James. I know the two of you are fairly familiar with each other, so
know each other a little bit.
Know each other a little bit, seeing as dry run is a thing. So yeah, do you want to give James an introduction, and then we'll actually let James speak since he's going to take over the episode from there, right, James?
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
So James Wickett is my co-founder over at Dry Run Security. But so James has done a lot, So first of all, he's very prominent speaker. Was the part of that initial crew that launched LastCon, heavily involved during the early days, and I don't know, probably beyond that as well, with DevOps days in Austin. I think you had a hand at some point in DevSecOps as well. Course on LinkedIn Learning for DevOps content. Is that one that's with Ernest?
I do that with Ernest.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So tons of views there. Produced a lot of good content, and great training course. Highly recommend. I could continue on and keep going, but the last thing I'll kind of say here is, James and I first met like, I don't know, we'll say 10 years ago or so. And, basically James was running the OWASP group out there, organizing it in Austin. I had built RailsGoat and alongside Mike McCabe as well. But yeah, built RailsGoat. James had me out there. And that was when we first met, and then started bringing James out to Nova and DC meetups out here where I'm at, and the rest is history. I guess it's not the last thing. The very last thing I'll say is that James was like employee, like after the founders, like the first employee, right, at Signal Sciences or something like that. Yeah. And obviously an amazing exit with Signal Sciences, and a really cool product, really cool team, and all good things. So with that having been said, hi, James. Welcome to this podcast for the first time ever.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be on the show, and appreciate it, guys. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. No problem. So we always like origin stories, right, okay. James? That's kind of, especially if first time people are on the podcast. Obviously, Ken and I are familiar with you, and everything that we've kind of done together over the course of the last few years. But for those of us, or for those listening that, that don't know you, first off, like, how did you get into, security and programming? Like, what is your background? Where did that actually start? Where did your interest start? And we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks again for having me on the show. And I'll kind of, I was thinking about this because Ken was asking me like, oh, we do cover the origin stories. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Okay. And it's funny when you start thinking about how do you get involved in something. And sometimes you look back and you think, how did I end up here? Right. How did I end up in this kind of was once kind of a weird niche of security, particularly application security. And it's like you'd have to tell people you're like interested in security. They're like, oh, okay, you're really into firewalls or into hacking stuff. Well, it's like, I don't know. I mean, kind of, maybe, So it's always that moment. But I set off in going to college at the University of Oklahoma to be a chemical engineering major, pre-med. I was like, okay, I'm going to maybe be a doctor or something, right? That was the idea. And I realized pretty quickly I was not cut out for either of those lines of work. In Oklahoma, being a chemical engineering major generally leads to working in the oil and natural gas, on the rigs or the fields or wherever, or in a refinery or something. So I thought, I really like computers. Maybe I should try this whole, computer thing instead. So I switched, after a bit there, and really got involved with, helping out. I'd already been doing some through high school, but I got a job at the business college working in the computer labs. And so it's like, got to make sure that the printer has enough paper, and got to make sure that people can reset their passwords or whatever it was, right? And we were ghosting all the machines, and I did that for a few months, and then they had some options for you could make an extra I think it was I don't know, $1.50 or $2 extra an hour if you would go be a junior sysadmin. And I was like, oh, I can do that. It turns out what that really means is when the professor's AV stuff breaks, you got to go in there and fix all the junk. Or we did have one professor that he liked to I think he was in the energy day trading thing. He was an energy trader. He broke equipment very regularly, mice, keyboards, stuff like that, slamming them against the wall, whatever. I'm assuming losing money or who knows what, right? Please don't sue me, University of Oklahoma. I have no idea what he was doing, but for some reason, this guy went through keyboards all the time. But so you'd have to go triage that kind of sort of scenario pretty often. And there's the Windows admins, and they had every now and then, during the summers, they gave us extra privileges so we could set up, things in our system and do all the Active Directory stuff. And this was in, early 2000s, right? So, I was thinking about I didn't go look them up, but, all the different worms that were going around, and, we have Windows XP, and we're there's one, frantic, it's everybody come to the office or whatever on a Saturday to go shut everything down, right? And turn, we're going to do patching and stuff and this kind of stuff. So I learned early that both security was important and fun. And I also learned I didn't want to be a Windows admin too at the same time. I learned Active Directory was not where I wanted to spend my life. And so I had an internship with IBM, and I got stuck on a documentation project, and I thought that wasn't a ton of fun either. And then, but out of school, I started down here in Austin, Texas, moved straight to work at National Instruments. And National Instruments had a good reputation at the time for taking people from straight out of school and kind of training them up and giving them responsibilities. And I was able to, through that time, join the web systems team. And so we were supporting ni.com, which I think at the time it was doing 100 million or more of dollars in on the website. So we had the catalog and search, and a bunch of developers that were associated with it, all the IT programs that were with it. And IT is or National Instruments is test and measurement gear for folks, and so to assemble all your stuff. It's complicated, right? So you need recommendation engines, forums to be hey, here's how you do it, and it's gear that scientists and engineers are buying. So we were always just adding new features to the site, and of course the site was going down, and we had all these classic DevOps problems where the Linux admins kind of sat in their row with the lights off, and network admins. Yeah, right. The network admins were cool. They're over there. Nobody really talked to them, and like our their boss like was adamant that we can't do drug testing for them, and I was like, okay, cool. And then there's like the Windows admins people, that they're doing their thing, right? And so, but on the web systems team, we were really in the early days, we were dotted line reporting in, like our direct managers were in IT, but really our charter and really the money to pay for us came out of marketing, because they were like, when the site is down, we lose money, right? And so the Linux admins, like they're racking and jacking in the middle of the day. They don't care like if stuff's down. They're just like, oh, it's just some web servers. Who cares, right? But like it's actual money affecting the business. So that was our charter to be brought in at that time. Did that for several years. Some of my friendships that came out of that, or one of them was Ernest Muller, who I teach that DevOps course with. Went to work for another small startup in between, a media startup, but then kind of in like the 2009, 2010, we sort of got the charter for like, hey, do some cloud stuff, right? And we're like, okay, cool, we can do that. And so from, let's see, 2000, and that time, like DevOps had just kind of started to become a thing. 2009, like that was that 10 deploys a day that John Allspach gave at Velocity Conference. And we were going to that. I remember going to South by Southwest here in Austin, Texas, and sitting like 10 feet away from, Werner Vogel's talking about this thing called the Amazon Cloud. And it's like, I'm like, man, it's a good idea. It sounds like, something we should try, right? And it's like,
that idea might work out someday.
Because I had actually just been, for this little like media startup, I had just been searching for like data center space. I was like, man, this is going to be really expensive and really problematic. And how are we going to do this? And it's like, oh, I can rent a virtual machine in the cloud or whatever. Okay, it's fine. That sounds cool. Like that's what I would like to do that. We kind of saw that move to virtualization while I was still at National Instruments, of like, somebody come to us and they have an idea. Okay, we need to deploy a new service. It's like, okay, great. How much is it going to cost? Well, here's it's going to cost you like, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000, whatever, to get the servers or whatever you need to buy. Once we place the order with Dell, it's 6 weeks for it up and running. And they're like, well, we need it in 2 weeks. I'm like, that's impossible, But the idea was always that, it's because, Dell's got to put it all together and they ship it out to you. And then, then when we rack it and jack it and put it all in place and it's ready to go. And I didn't think on this podcast I'd say the words racking and jacking twice in the same. I guess it's like when you start thinking about the past, like how far we've come. But it was like 6 weeks. Like we try to like streamline the process as much as we could, but like 6 weeks is what it took, from like the Linux people to do their thing, to the networking, the storage, the backups, the whatever, right? And then we so that was kind of our like that was that moment. We moved to virtualized infrastructure, and guess what? You want to know how long it took to put a server in place once you had like VMs there? It took 6 weeks. It's like you get your VM, and then they still had to do all the same process to it. And then but the world's changing, and we're thinking, well, we need to provide cloud services for our customers. We're providing like dashboards for like people that are running like their National Instruments gear on their wind farms or anything like that. We had an FPGA compile cloud where you could send it up to our machines, and we would do the compile across a bunch of different nodes and then give you different versions of that and bake it for them. So it was really, really a fun time. And we sort of got a blank check, and we got moved out of IT and into R&D and said, just, do stuff to deliver, cloud services for our environment. They didn't really care. The business didn't know anything about DevOps. They didn't know anything about any way that we organized ourselves. All they wanted were these like products to start working with, like backend SaaS type services. And we had been fortunate enough being here in Austin, like one of the original ops camps happened here, and like Chef and Puppet, both their founders were there, and like John Willis was here in town, and like in the back of a bar, they're all like, okay, we're gonna all like, here's what we're gonna do, this thing called DevOps. And DevOps, it's already started to become a thing, but they're like, yeah, we really believe in it, we're gonna all care about it. I met Gene Kim, who probably your audience really knows really well, but also in a bar, and I think at a Dave Nielsen planned a cloud camp, and I got to speak at it, and then I'm talking about like security and DevOps and how it should work together, and Gene and I kind of become fast friends through that moment. I mean, there's like 14 people in the audience at that point. It's like, so Gene's just there because he's like, so I sometimes think back, it's like, well, just living in Austin, like at that time was a really good time. I know South by Southwest is huge now, and the tech scene is very, has a lot of voices in it here in Austin. But you rewind to those early days, like back, even Ken, when we had you come speak and at OWASP Austin, it's like, we didn't even have like security conferences that you could speak of that you would be like proud to be like, hey, yeah, that's a security conference. We had one conference, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but it like rotated between Austin, Dallas, Houston, and I think it was like, okay, well, but it is a lot of it was like backup, disaster recovery type stuff, and that was kind of our security conference that kind of fine. It's a fine conference, but like I met Jeremiah Grossman in a basement at the Hyatt at that conference, and he was like, hey, you want to come work for me? You just got to move to California. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. But like I was getting exposed to all these ideas, like, and really realizing that like application security is really important. Through our work with OWASP, we were kind of seeing more and more of like, just like our first try, we're like, well, let's have a conference about it, like this LastCon thing, and let's have the Lone Star Application Security Conference, and sort of structured in a way that's kind of like what they do for like Ruby conference, or kind of like more for some of these other dev conferences. And that was our way to get started and get the community rolling, and then we've been fortunate that like now Austin really has kind of grown and blossomed into more like a security friendly space, devs and startup friendly space. So that's where I've been. Where else can I say? I feel like I've been talking a while, but that's I guess when you're old, this is what happens. And then I started doing the DevOps Days thing with Ernest and Karthik, and also like Peko and Bill, and we have a little site that we mostly Ernest writes on, but every now and then we contribute, called the Agile Admins, and we kind of do some stuff together there. And we started the DevOps Days journey really just out of the desire to like help the local Austin community, much like we did with LastCon, and we're like, okay, like security has to do this. And our first foray into DevOps Days was in 2012. I remember we had 2 security talks, which was kind of that was a big deal back then, because like security wasn't really part of DevOps at that point. But we said, all right, let's bring in Nick Galbraith, who later founded Signal Sciences, and then James Turnbull, both giving like security keynotes, and that sort of kind of blew everybody's mind. I mean, this is probably, I don't know, there's only been like a couple DevOps days ever in the world to happen at that time, right? So we were like number 5 or 6, right? A couple in Silicon Valley, I think one in like the Philippines or somewhere. But so it was just sort of so new that people were just like, what is this thing? So, and then we just kept kind of growing it from there, trying to help the community, trying to help people get involved in it. And we got lucky that somebody saw some stuff that Ernest and I had done. In one of the posts we've written about, like, what is DevOps, helping people try to find it. And they said, oh, you want to teach this thing for lynda.com, which lynda.com later got acquired by LinkedIn Learning, or became LinkedIn Learning. And, LinkedIn got acquired by Microsoft. So we just thought, well, DevOps has been really meaningful in our career. It helped us like no longer have this crazy like on-call schedule that was not working. We were kind of bridging boundaries between people. It helped us like kind of form a new language, a new style of work, the way we were collaborating. There's some bumps along the way, but like all in all, like we were just really glad to have found it, and to find kind of like, when you kind of find people that are like you and your tribe, you're like, oh, okay, like, it's like you work at this other spot, I work over here, but we all are having the same problem. Like we're all like hating our lives because of like this 24/7, on-call rotation or whatever it is that's going on. And so we decided like, hey, we'll teach this course on lynda.com. And it got pretty good reception. But then after LinkedIn Learning bought them, and then Microsoft acquisition as well, just and the growth of DevOps, like we've had a couple revisions of the course. We're doing like a whole like refresh of the course coming up in the fall. But just in the last 2 years since the last refresh, like 400,000 people have taken the course, and then the data is lost at the time before that. But we kind of estimate somewhere close to 1 million people have taken the course is kind of the rough guess, but the metrics are, not completely there. But so it's been really like an honor to be part of that for people, to help them kind of experience DevOps, to help them see, we're translated in a few different languages on that course. And
have you heard you? Wait. We got to pause for a second there, though.
Yeah.
Have you heard yourself in other languages dubbed over?
Yes, artists and I have a little bit of a competition, like who gets the good voice actor versus who gets the bad voice actor, and so or the more desirable voice actor. They're all good, and we don't speak the language, so we don't really know what they're which one is better or not. But so we do kind of have some jokes on that. But I think in Spanish I got the good one. So yeah,
you sound very. It doesn't sound very majestic, very representative of. Yeah. The couple things I take away so far, by the way, are keeping your ear to the ground on sort of problem spaces and new things coming out, and latching on to new ways to solve problems. And then secondly, networking. Like honestly, and I know you, so I'd say that's definitely a huge asset of yours. But for those listening who are earlier in their career, I think one of the questions, that always comes up are like, how do I kind of like build that network? And how do I do those things? And honestly, a lot of this is, you mentioned several times, just like offhand meeting some of the people that are, very well known, we'll say. I don't want to call them rock stars or whatever, but, really well known in their industry folks. And it's just because you like went out there to these conferences where they're trying to solve similar problems, but also in new ways. Anyways, those are my two takeaways for some success there.
The interesting thing, I mean, for me, right, like obviously, like, we've seen similar paths and we've talked to a lot of people about it, but the kind of this running theme with people that seem to be successful is the ability to just go out and solve the problems that are in front of them, right? Like, and even though it's a small community at a time, specializing or, actually diving in with other people that are interested, trying to solve that same problem, leads to more and more just like community building and everything else. And don't be afraid of that, right? Just because there's not a solution that's out there that fits doesn't mean that it's not something that's worth investing your time in.
No, I appreciate that. And I don't even know if it's like something that I sit around thinking like, oh, that's what helps make, success happen or something like that. I don't even know. I mean, I think that more so, it's like, I find myself naturally generally caring about other people. And so like I just want to like help other people. And I know sometimes like in our industry, it's like, it's easier to kind of be, head down trying to work on the thing that's in front of you, or kind of like being overloaded at work. That's very, very common, and so trying to find those moments where you can like go to that user group, help somebody, teach somebody something else, find a way to like that you can help contribute to, the improvement of somebody else's life. Right. I think those are the moments. I mean, both of y'all are community builders. I mean, look at this show, right? You're trying to help the community at large with that. So, I know that I know people appreciate that a lot, because it sort of takes us out of our smaller sphere of the things that you're doing from our day to day, and thinking like at the larger level, like here, right, nationally, right? Like, how do we think about like the problem space that we're dealing with? But even if you're a listener here and you're like, okay, well, I'm positioned in, XYZ city. Well, how do you make, XYZ city a little bit better, right? For other people that are like you, or that are dealing with some of the similar problems that you might be having, or maybe that, like, even if they're like tangential problems, it's like, how do you kind of gather a little bit of that community together? Because it helps, and it's pretty rewarding to hear the stories from people that, like sometimes we get people, right? Let Ernest and I know, like, oh, hey, we took your course and I switched jobs and made a whole new career out of DevOps, or I was in the military and I wanted to move into I got this tech sales role and I didn't know have any clue about DevOps, and that was really helpful for me, or even like marketing people or other folks that have been able to just get the vocabulary down. And it's like that sort of stuff's really rewarding to help people, even people that aren't exactly in kind of maybe the target audience that you intend for your efforts to hit. We run this little thing, and we've been doing it for, I don't know, maybe almost the whole time of well, I guess we started maybe 7 or 8 years. But in Austin, we have this thing called Pay Talk, where we'll kind of let everybody you write down your salary, and then you kind of drop it in a bucket, and you tie your level, and then we post them on a board, and we have like a little open space inside of our DevOps days. And like stuff like that's really helpful for the community to realize, like, ooh, I'm vastly underpaid. Like, I need to go, do something else, right? Or, I want to get to that point. Like, how do I do that, right? And there's other people that I know are in this room who could help me, with that. We hear stories, real success stories coming out of that on a regular basis. But like you find like those community things that you can take part in.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, now that you mentioned that, at that conference, around the same time they mentioned Pay Talk, they had also had, so I'm referring to DevOps Days Austin, for those listening. In the same space, they had talked about how, I can't remember his name. He had this great short, he read a poem, gave a little bit of this is the reason that we all like get together and just solve problems, because one idea, like DevOps, changes everything.
Yeah, you're thinking of Boyd, I think. Boyd Hemphill.
Yes.
Yes.
That sounds correct.
Yes.
And anyway, so that was cool. Like, everybody kind of broke out into groups and said, this is a problem we're going to try and solve today. And I love that. And I think that's kind of it's a lot of what you've talked about. It's just honestly picking a problem that people have and teaming up with others to solve it. So
yeah. Boyd is a fun story about Boyd. If you don't know, there's one DevOps Days, I don't remember what year it was, but like he gets on stage with like a stack of the Phoenix Project book from Gene Kim, and he's like, we have your little like lightning talk time, and he's like, a man wrote a story about your life. Read it. And then he just started generally chunking books into the crowd, like at people, right? Like they're hardback, books.
That's awesome.
Memory is like the T-shirt canon, but not T-shirts. You're like, oh, this is not okay, boy.
But more painful.
Someone's not paying attention, and all of a sudden a broken nose, right? Yeah, that's.
Look at your phone while Boyd's on stage. He gets up there. People like, you can see the nervous tick when he gets on stage. Even today, he's like, is he going to throw something at us?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it was a fun conference because of the people that all came there. I think a lot of people had the same mentality as you, just trying to help, trying to improve things.
Yeah, Austin was kind of like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's, I don't know, starting to see that in more places, right? Across the country, like some of the smaller meetup groups and things like that. I think that's one thing that we, when you're working so hard, you're working for a company in a place which isn't traditionally like one of the tech hubs. You kind of get this feeling that you're isolated, that there's no one around that understands the problems that you're having. But just starting to have that conversation, going to whatever security meetup or Linux meetup or whatever is actually in your town, you're going to find people that have the same issues. We always laugh here in Salt Lake City that our like local OWASP meetup is really just, AppSec support group, because everybody comes to just sit together and bitch about like all the problems they're having. But we've seen that grow from what started at 3 or 4 people to regularly having 20 plus people that show up for it, even though it's a very informal type meetup, right? Like we'll have a talk once in a while, but most of it is just like, guys, what problems are we having, right? Like I'm dealing with this. Let's talk about it for an hour because like other people are out there that have the same problem, and it's just encouraging to see that happen in the spaces that we're currently in, right? And I'm with you, James. It's all about that community building and just getting your voice out there, not being shy about what the problems are that you're having.
Yeah, that's great.
That can be hard too, like to just, for me anyways, it's not easy to just like approach random people and introduce yourself and make those connections. But James, that is definitely something I mean, you're 100% comfortable in. Is that natural, or did you like work on that? Or yeah, I'm very curious.
Yeah. Oh, that's kind of a deep cut question. I should be eating like some
extrovert, introvert. Like, what are you, James? Let's get to the core of it.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of rank more usually in the extroverted side of things. My wife's really good at it. Like she used to be a general manager for a newspaper, and I would have to go out to these like, evening business events, and I would just like, I would get stuck talking to like 1 or 2 people that I could kind of pick out of the crowd as like they're also engineers or tech people. I'm pretty good at that actually, and like, oh, my people, So, but then she would just like work the whole room, right? And then like 2 hours later, she comes back. She's had 80 conversations or whatever, and some sponsors, some city people, some whatever. Just had to go do all the things, and so I don't know. So I definitely got some of that like osmosis through just like being a part of that and seeing like, okay, how do you help make that? How do you do that activity, right? Because it doesn't just come like you have to build up that. No. It's not. Nobody really is just natively great at it, right? She had somebody show her how to do that. It's just sort of a process. But I think in the tech world, you can really make a difference, or you can really find a way to do this by challenge yourself to like give like a small talk, like a 5-minute talk, or if you're going to one of those meetups, like bring up a question and show something, or do something like somehow like participate in with your own voice and be a part of that, right? Because we all like to solve problems, right? Or we like to, or discover problems or whatever. Like that's why we're in this industry. Like we're all happy about that. So, being open and saying like, oh, hey, I am having this problem, or, oh, hey, look, I found out this cool new thing to do X, Y, Z, right? I've given like, stuff like, here's how I got my Vim stuff set up talks before, way back in the day. Right. Or, I don't know. I feel like those are some like ways that like if you're kind of getting started, this is you're early in your career, look for those spots where you can give some sort of small talk and participate, because then other people will approach you out of that, and then you don't even have to go and approach them. Like you're kind of seeding that out there, right? And if that's something you need help with or whatever, like reach out. I'd be happy to like give some advice on anything like that, or if there's a presentation you want to give or something. Yeah. Hit me up on Twitter. Yeah.
I was going to say, you're in our Slack. So if people want to DM you for any reason, they totally can.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Hey, can I ask you, because we didn't get to this and you didn't mention it, Gauntlet, where does Gauntlet fit in this timeline of your origin story, and what was the reason behind it? And if you could just tell, kind of explain what Gauntlet was, and like I said, where it fit in your timeline and their purpose.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. Yeah. I was thinking about like, oh, I didn't really say much about that. So we are in that kind of 2009, 2010 spot. We're chartered to build out cloud services. We're, I've kind of always been because I come from like more of a sysadmin background, and then it's like, all right, you were also a security person, right? It's like, so I got, I did like the certification process and did some of that stuff, and helped like set up our, way back in the day, like our Citrix NetScaler with the WAF stuff turned on, and I broke everything, and it was like, that kind of stuff. So fast forward, we're like, okay, new charter, we're doing cloud stuff, we're doing this thing called, DevOps, and security's got to be part of the story. Our customers aren't going to like trust us like with their compile cloud data or their telemetry data off their windmills or wind farms or anything like that if we don't have a solid story with that. So really, we worked with some consulting groups to do like, hey, let's do like a threat model exercise just to help get our teams, bought in on that. We tried to automate security testing, ran some scanners, but it was in that moment where I'm like, there should be a better way. I'd been to some Ruby conferences. I had seen like how Cucumber works, and I was like, oh, okay, like so BDD security, maybe they could like coexist. And that was kind of the genesis of that idea of like, okay, maybe developers and security and operations people could all like collaborate around these things, these gauntlet attack files, where they could just sort of in plain English sort of say like, here's how I run like my scanner, here's how I run my test, here's the auth that I'm going to try. And so through the process, Mani Tadian and I and Karthik has also helped out with that as well. And we were all sort of just kind of really interested in that problem. And that was like around the time of 2012 for AppSec USA, and which was here in Austin for that time. So that was kind of like in that moment, that's when we're all sort of just really curious about how that could work. Found some people really resonated with that and were able to like use that and try that out. We later put it in like containers so people could run kind of containerized workloads on that, so you don't have to like worry about installing the scanners or doing any of that kind of stuff. So we keep the project. It hasn't really had a lot of updates lately because it's sort of been in that stable. We're kind of locked in like on an older version of Cucumber, but yeah, that's kind of where that project has been and kind of formed over time.
Yeah, I know that Seth, you did something similar with Sputter. I don't remember the timeline though.
Yeah, that was
after that.
Yeah, that was probably 2014, somewhere around there, 2013. Similar, yeah, but similar idea that I ran out of dev cycles, right? Like the traditional problem there.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But it would be interesting to look into some of that, because I mean there still is a need with it, right? Like when you start talking about what an AppSec pipeline looks like, CI/CD stuff too. So cool. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm gonna have to go look at it.
Yeah, and it's nice because I just find it funny because I know like you've said it a million times on the podcast, Seth, that like AppSec is just glorified QA testers, and when you start seeing two people that I respect build essentially like tooling
QA testing tools,
empowering developers to do like QA testing tools, it's like, all right, well, yeah, like maybe there's something to that, right? So it's security QA style testing. So it's just kind of it's just funny. Well, funny to think about.
It's that thought, like developers really care about quality. Security is a function of quality. Developers do care about security. We just give them like really weird ways to do it. We as like the industry at large, and we test way after they've written the code. That's like not a great feeling for them. Or we'll kind of give a lot of like output that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Y'all know this. Your audience already knows these problems. But it's that like developers and security not able to kind of work around kind of the same language or the same format. Like so, like when I would put Gauntlet test, so I would write Gauntlet stuff for National Instruments, and then also later at Signal Sciences we had some Gauntlet stuff that happened inside of our pipeline. Right? It's like, okay, before you deploy, like it has to pass all these gates. Now we didn't block at Signal Sciences. We didn't block on that. We said, all right, like just as long as you have it run, like you can kind of keep on pushing it through. But we would find like people really started to trust it and started to see like, oh, like we had some issues where like we had a kind of a pretty well-known vulnerability kind of on our main dashboard. And then we're like, okay, let's write some tests that like always checks that for every build, every deploy. So those are, that was part of the pattern that we started using. And you could see that it really helped the team as we were working. It's like, oh, hey, look, the gauntlet stuff didn't turn green for some reason. I don't know, maybe the container went bad or whatever, right? And it wasn't blocking, but it certainly informed their decision making on, oh, should I still push this deploy forward? Should I dig in a little deeper to figure out what the heck's going on here? So it helped.
I think if you hit on a, sorry, what was that last part?
Help spark that conversation, So that was always good for the team.
Yeah, actually, just sparking a conversation amongst the two different groups is pretty important. And I mean, like this is let's just call it out. You said developers care about security, and not everybody believes that, obviously. And of course, that's a painting with broad strokes. You can't apply a general statement to everybody. All those caveats aside, but yeah, typically, it's I think there, especially, I'll say this, with all the almost overly played out with the whole empathy for, like if it's DevOps, if it's software developer conference, if it's security, you see all these talks about empathy. So maybe with all those talks about empathy, people are starting to understand one another. But in any case, I guess where I'm going with this is I do think you're right. In my opinion, I do think developers, again, painting with a broad brush here, or broad strokes, but they do care about security. But having said that, yeah, it's like, what have we done for them traditionally? Right?
And that's exactly what I wanted to tie into, right? Like the tooling, James, that you bring up. And as a developer, security tools are like, they're one of the worst things to add to your pipeline from an efficiency perspective. And like you look at DAST, you look at SAST, what has traditionally been, hey, these are the security gates that I have to cross. And I mean, I can't tell you the number of nightmares that I had trying to do Fortify specifically, like in a DevOps style pipeline for a financial years ago, that, we couldn't actually block builds. We couldn't actually like get it to run successfully, right? Like with any degree of certainty, enough that I was comfortable as a developer turning it on and giving all the results back to a developer. I just couldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
And I know that kind of leads into, what is going on now in both of your lives, right? But I'm interested to hear, like, where you made that jump. Like, what was it that, that took you into, okay, now it's time, like, to figure something new out. Why did you go there?
Yeah, I think it's a stream that I've felt for a long time. In fact, when I've told people recently, I'm like, hey, starting a company with Ken, and they're like, oh, you've always cared about like developers and security, working together, right? Because we have this like mass siloization problem where it's like you'll have 100 developers to like one security person, right? And it's like, and so you can't figure out. There's no other way to scale that than like to add the right tooling and kind of like help kind of cross boundaries and try to like be doing some of those same problems that we did whenever we had like 10 developers to one operations person in DevOps, right? So we just have we have a 10x problem to make the jump to DevSecOps, whether you like that term or not, it doesn't matter. But our initial land grab of like DevOps and like we're now going to do this thing and operations are going to do the agile practices, like to now bring security into that. It's just going to be a lot harder, and it has been for people. And I realize that not everybody believes this whole like developers care about security thing. Every developer I've worked with has, like, no one says like I would like to write quality code that's like very vulnerable and like I'm going to get I'm going to have problems with. Like we all know that, right? And I think we see a testament to like how well some of these things like Dependabot or whatever have been, because where developers know that like they're relying on other people's code, putting that in their system. That's a problem, right? I want to know like what's going on under the hood with that. So I feel like those kind of are the things where realizing like, yeah, no, developers do care about security. I'll tell you this. Okay, here's the crazy thing, Seth. I don't know. I think I've told Ken, I think I've told you this, but at RSA this year, and in the kind of like the startup showcase thing, there's one of the startups, and they kind of like offhandedly, make some derogatory, like I'm like, you're a startup, like you're supposed to be like, they're making derogatory comments about developers and how they're no good at security and stuff like that. And I'm like, I feel like where like you could have like pulled somebody from a decade ago and put them on stage, and like it's like we would have been saying the same thing. And I'm like, how is that really how far we've come? And I feel just that I think we just have a lot of work ahead of us to do, because there's that we have an amplified siloization problem. We also have like where in an IT department where you had DevOps, it's like the operations people maybe like reported through like a different reporting chain. Well, like a lot, I mean, y'all know sometimes security could be reporting through finance or where, right? It's like you have no idea in an organization. So like it's like we have like all this separation of stuff, right? And then security means so many things to so many different organizations. It's like, okay, the people who get the compliance stuff to happen, or it's the people who do like a real application security program or whatever. There's this quote Steve Beloven says, it's like security slows things down and the breaches haven't gotten any better. He says it more eloquently because of who he is, but
yeah,
like it's like, okay, like that's that makes a ton of sense, right? Like we're still having problems, and like we're still like not increasing overall code velocity. We're still increasing overall cycle time. That's a problem. And so like that, we can't do that. And I, through the process of kind of starting dry run security, Ken and I have talked to some developers and people, and it's like you start hearing little stories about like how people are like, yeah, well, the secure SDLC, see, we try to avoid, people will say this, we try to avoid this because like it's really slow. So like, and so then what's happening, right? So now developers are on the back end doing a lot of batching of changes, and like batching of changes is like not a good idea, right? Like that goes against all the lean and agile flow stuff we've been trying to do for forever, right? Y'all know this, but
yeah,
but all these compromises start happening, and like we have the inverse incentives starting being applied to the developers, to the security team. So there has to be a way for this to like to move forward. And so whether you call it DevOps, DevSecOps, however, but like there needs to be that merging of where like we're actually able to care about the same stuff together, seeing each other as the same part of that same business. So
I agree, and I don't think it's just the tooling. I think it's so security is to the point where now people recognize OWASP, ironically, as OWASP is having its moment, right, again, and continues to, and it probably always will. It's a big organization, but in any case, that barrier, awareness, we're over that. But then forget the tooling and like it being for a lot of devs like kind of nonsense. Like the output is like, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I have maybe some finding here, but like then I kind of need to know, is that exploitable? I don't know that. I don't have that skill set. So then what did we start doing? We said, well, here, I got it. We're going to give you training.
yeah.
The training's awful. The training's not good. I mean, a lot there, not to say that there aren't, like, I really do like what Secure Code Warrior does. What's that?
I said, there's some good training out there.
There is some good training, and you can get it from James. No, yeah. No,
yeah.
But no, there is some decent training, and it's all improving, but it's far and few between, right? And even then, in that case, like take a Secure Code Warrior. Thankfully, now they offer the whole, you can customize your content, but in the early days, it wasn't very custom. So you had. And this is true for a lot of the cheat sheets out there, for a lot of the tutorials, just general security guidance. It's all and it has to be, right? It has to be somewhat generic because you're covering a wide swath of things. But the reality is every insert dry run training. No, we don't have a training. Sorry. But if we did, no. So, yeah, on the training front, it's kind of been, up until now, there haven't been like a ton of great platforms that really hit developers where they need to be. terms of going back to the cheat sheets and guidance, or even just, taking a different approach, and maybe working more with the folks that are, and some security folks do this. So I don't want to say this has never happened. It's for sure happened. But, some of the frameworks that are out there could use like more security love to help make things, the patterns a little bit more secure, or whatever it may be that can prevent these vulnerabilities. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the interest is there. I think the awareness is there. But whether it's training or it's online materials or it's tooling or whatever it might be, I actually think security to date has done kind of a poor job. And on that note as well, I just did want to add too, one thing that I think I mentioned to you, James, this, or maybe Seth, I'm not sure if I talked to either of you about this, but one thing that kind of cracked me up, speaking of RSA, is when you go to that floor, every single company had the word secure this or secure that or feel secure. It's all about feeling secure. Mm-hmm. And in the reality of like any of this, for the listeners, I think everybody can agree that we're really not ever feeling secure. There's never like a point where anybody who does this professionally feels like things are secure. So I don't necessarily understand the pitch there anymore. It seems overloaded. It seems like it almost reminds me of the South Park episode where what is it, like insecurity or something like that? Where it's literally just like this security company. The security company is called Insecurity, and it's just there to make people feel better. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to make people feel better. I think we need to be focusing on a different thing. I don't know if that's like risk reduction. I really don't know what it is, but I don't think using the for feeling in the term secure is adequate. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts on there. I don't know if either of you disagree, agree, any of those points you want to slightly tweak.
No, I mean, I do agree, right? Like from a base level, like security's always been about, right? Like feeling like you're ahead of where you need to be and you're not going to get hacked, right? Like that's a lot of the tooling that's out there, a lot of the stuff that we've put into place, like even some of the metrics, like that, and I honestly, like this is in that most recent talk that I've been giving about like modern versus old school, like vulnerabilities and what kind of like the state of AppSec over my career. But that's one of the things that I bring up is that, what do the security tools produce and who is the consumer of what they produce? And it hasn't been developers in the past. It hasn't been, custom or, for an application. It's been this wide swath of, oh, well, we prevented 500,000 attacks against our website because someone was Nmap scanning us, right? Like, and so like, we've got this nice blinky green, like we secured everything. So you should feel great about what you've done and all the money that you spent on our tool because of this big green check that we gave you. When in reality, you've opened up the hole to your website, you have all these other problems, and the tool has no awareness of what's actually going on inside the application, but it's all about who is the audience. And I think you're still seeing that, Ken, at RSA, is the audience for most of the tools is, how can I produce a dashboard or some sort of filling and invoke a blanket to a security blanket to the management that they're doing a good thing, right? So
yeah. Ironically, I do want to point out, it's not at all part of your point, but the dashboard thing cracks me up, since the number one thing that we hear, and I think everybody can agree on, is that the dashboards are the things that usually you don't care about at all. It's usually the API and the actual data itself that you tend
it depends.
Care about.
Again, it depends on who you talk to, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
the people signing the checks, the people signing the checks need something out of there. And so like the security people and the developers will tell you that, oh, we want the API, we want the data, we want to load it into our SIM or whatever else. But where does that end up at the end of the day? It ends up in a dashboard or a presentation that goes to the board. Yes, it does. It ends up in a different dashboard. And so like the audience at some level are the people that sign those checks. And that is the filling that you've got to induce. And so on the flip side of that, right, like I start to think about, how do you induce that filling? How do you actually give developers and security people that same level of assurance? And it starts with, I don't know, we haven't necessarily talked about this yet, right? Like, but it starts with knowing the context of what that developer or what that environment actually is, in order to give the feedback that is really relevant, security relevant to those people.
Yeah.
That's a pretty great segue.
Yeah,
We
it
haven't
is.
gotten into it yet.
We haven't
But we got about 6 minutes left, and we haven't even talked about contextual security analysis. And I think,
well, it is. I mean,
segue.
that's we've kind of danced around it. We've talked about the issues that are out there, and I know that was you guys bringing that up at the happy hour, right? Like that's the first time, and I know like it came up more and more, and it's starting to become more of a term. But this idea of contextual security analysis really fits with what we're trying to do nowadays, right?
Yeah. I think once you kind of break from that mindset of either, I like how you're saying like security blanket, but then also like people sometimes will say like security theater, or like kind of like security that's like, on off, binary thing, or like it's, solved or whatever. Right? I think because we've come from some of those, the background of where like we have this still kind of mythical magical packet that can like come and like just take over our entire network, and we certainly saw some weird networking things 20 years ago, right, that would do stuff kind of like that, right? But where are we now, and like how does application security work, and how does it deal with the changes we make? Like there's a process, there's a flow to it, right? As you're making changes to your application, like who's best suited to know like, ooh, you've kind of changed some sensitive code paths, or the way you changed an auth, or the way you're dealing with these functions, or you're using this like templating language or parser that like we don't expect you to, or whatever. So we start thinking about these changes, and Ken and I have been kind of talking about this and thinking about it. I know the industry at large you see the word security context show up more and more. People are talking about that, and it's giving that context to the people who are best suited to make the changes and do something with it, the developers, and put it in a way that like makes sense to them. That's not like, oh, you have CVE 1073 or whatever, right? It's like no, it's like you like put it in a way to say like, you added just a few lines here, but that like 23 new routes got added to your code. Like, was that expected, right? Or hey, you're touching a part of this code base that's like really hasn't been modified for a while, right? Or we can kind of give some background on that and show some brittleness of the system. Or we think about like you're touching some code paths that are critical, right? Or and then we're also able to do some of the static stuff and some of the dynamic pieces, or kind of work with those tooling, but kind of paint like a fuller picture for the developer as they're writing code. Like, yeah, that's what we think of as contextual security analysis, being able to do that during that process.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ken. Yeah, a lot of data.
No. I was just saying, yeah, there's a lot of other information, that we can glean about things outside of just, a single data point. There's many data points you can pull from to give the full complete picture.
Yeah, and having access into that sort of analysis. I mean, as a consultant, right? Like trying to step into code bases as well. It'll be interesting to see what you guys can provide, because I'm always struggling on how to level up and provide that sort of contextual analysis to developers, right? Like I recently attended a conference so I was in Europe, and I'm talking to them about where they're at with their like AppSec programs, and it was discouraging to hear that most of the security companies over, like at least that these individuals were dealing with in these organizations, were still at the level of, oh, right, it looks like you have SQL injection, go fix that, right? Like not even right, like, oh, what are the routes involved? How do we go about that? What is the framework that you're using? Like the same sort of recommendations that we've been trying to give for a long time as outsiders, at least in the AppSec space. Like, Ken and I, as we've been consulting over the years, we've tried to do that, but without the sort of low level, like code access that I know you guys are working on. It's very difficult to get to that sort of a recommendation. So it's going to be interesting to see what you pull out, where you start, and what you can actually do at that level. I mean, how do you feel like the response has been with it? I know you're working with some companies as you build things out. How has the response been from those companies and those developers for what you've provided so far?
Yeah. Just this weekend we got. We didn't even talk about this ahead of time, but it's like just this weekend. Yeah, we got good feedback from one of our early customers that like we found a lot of interesting stuff in some parts of their code base that they're not. They don't make a bunch of changes in that often, and it was really kind of glowing feedback. And I was like, oh, this is good. So. And we're in that early phase where we're working with companies. If you have an AppSec program or you're trying to sort out like where how to do this kind of stuff, or you're interested in the idea of contextual security analysis, like we're working with companies on that in kind of this early phase to help see what kind of value we can show. And especially like you mentioned, sometimes the messier the code base, the better, right? Because then we can really surface some information that you wouldn't have really had otherwise. And I feel like that was a lot of the feedback we're getting from one of our early customers here.
Yeah. So, I mean, along those lines, right? What languages and frameworks are you concentrating on first? Like, if people are interested in signing up for like an early alpha beta, like what sort of feedback do you need on that, or how can they go about it?
Yeah, we work with people that are using GitHub for their code, version control and repositories. So we can hook there. We do have some generic adapters that can work for most of the modern languages. That's looking for like some of the code path stuff and some of the other pieces we mentioned. But then we can go really deep on like Node applications, particularly Express, and then some other JavaScript, TypeScript stuff. We believe we can transfer to it pretty easily. And we've had some like early tests that show some pretty remarkable stuff on some of in kind of our lab environment. So we are looking for people that whether you have Node or not, we're interested in like chatting to see like how can we help you, what can we find, kind of run in your GitHub as a GitHub action, and like we'll see what we find for you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I've posted the website because I do want to push people that direction, right? Like it's it'll be like I said, as a third party like consultant, like when I go into a lot of these organizations, we're always looking for ways to to up that game. So we'll keep pushing it along. And
you have unlimited access to it, Seth. So it's yours.
Okay, sweet. I wonder if I can find a guy that knows about it. But yeah, so yeah, sweet.
You'll be speaking. I did want to mention. Could you just fill people in on where you're going to be next for the next few conferences?
Oh yeah. The next thing I'm going to be at is at Developer Week. I think that's like August 15th, 16th, and out in the San Francisco Bay Area. So that'll be fun. You're going to be at DEF CON, right? So that's coming up pretty soon.
Yes. I think we're trying to look at doing some get together happy hour or something there too. So we'll figure that out.
Yeah, the one at RSA was really a lot of fun. Thanks for everybody who came out to that. We really enjoyed that. So
yeah, it was a good time. And yeah, thanks to Dry Run for sponsoring that. Right? Like
we're happy to. Yeah,
it was great.
Bring the T-shirt cannon for the next one, right?
Yes,
book cannon. We're going a different direction.
A book cannon. Yeah.
That was a bad idea.
Sorry, this is now a Dry Run book cannon plug spot. So we're sweet. I know we also you're doing AppSec USA too.
Yeah,
in October.
Great.
So that'll be a good one too.
Yep. Yeah,
out here in DC, so he'll be coming out to my neck of the woods.
Your neck of the woods, yeah. Sweet. Well, good. I know we've been going for an hour. I want to make sure to be cognizant of everyone's time. Is it any final thoughts, James? Anything else you wanted to add before we go ahead and wrap things up?
Our lawyers do not support the book canon idea. And
I don't know. I have it on good authority that Ken wants to do that now. So
yeah, that's good. We'll work on that. We'll put that in the idea parking lot. So
yeah.
All right, y'all.
Sweet. Good. Then, yeah, thanks for joining us today. Good conversation. Good to, get to know you better and your background. And we have posted your Twitter handle, but you are in Slack if people are interested. We'll push them that direction. And yeah, Ken, any final thoughts for today?
No, so thanks to the listeners. Thank you to James, and thank you to our sponsor, Redpoint.
Yeah.
Bunch of thanks.
Thanks, Redpoint. Yep. Thanks, everyone. And we will catch you all next week. Have a good one.
Bye.